large companies are like battleships. And the challenge in, turning battleships, they turn slowly. And while, because of the sheer footprint of a company, you can have 100 things going on, literally 100, 200 things going on in the company. At the highest level, there are like 2 or 3 things that are disproportionately important. And kind of figuring out that's where you have the biggest leverage was super important. Choose your friends really carefully. If you're after this task, who do you talk to on a regular basis will really influence your ability to be courageous. So if you surround yourself with 4 or 5, if you're an entrepreneur, I'd strongly urge you to find 2 or 3 people who have done this before that'll help you be courageous. Because it does get lonely, and you're going to get, at least once, maybe 10 times along the way, get real doubt about pulling this off.
Welcome to the Courageous Leadership Podcast. Today we are speaking with Amar Hanspal. He's the co-founder and CEO of Motif and former co-CEO of Autodesk. He's relentlessly drawn to doing hard things. And I must admit, I don't know about you, but I am leaning in to a conversation where somebody is basically looking to do complex things and wanting to share how he's doing it. In fact, one of the key things he mentioned at the end is that he's constantly on the lookout for wisdom, because effectively wisdom is in short supply out there. There's opinions everywhere, but wisdom, genuine, actual wisdom, is hard to come by. And I could just sense that every word he was saying is really on that point of trying to share stories about hardships and the good things that have come out of those hardships, and just his willingness to share those in a very candid, very open way. Now, this is somebody who has led very big teams, 7,000 odd people at Autodesk, and has gone back into now a startup world to try and accomplish something very challenging, but also very exciting. So I can't wait for you to listen to this episode and to absorb the wisdom that he is sharing. This podcast is brought to you by the Courageous Leaders app. This app is designed to get you to lead with clarity, be highly valued, and build your impact. It's for leaders who've outgrown the way things have always been done, for next-gen leaders who know that there is a more effective, more courageous way to lead. And they just need a framework, and they need the tools and the tips and the strategies from somebody who has been through it and somebody who has researched leaders who have done big, bold, courageous things. And why is this different? This gives you tangible tools and strategies that you can apply immediately, no matter what stage of the project you are on or what sector, what scale. It feels as though you've got an expert leader in your corner, and you can make this fit your schedule. I've had very busy leaders go through my program, and they're amazed that they had time to do it, and the actions and the things that changed around them as a result. So I can't wait for you to check it out for yourself. Look at the links below and start today.
Tanya, what I would say is that I don't think I ever started out trying to be CEO of anything. So, what has kept me constant has been sort of, I think, over my all these years, is a desire to learn and sort of get good at what is put in front of me. And I think over the years, I've realized something's come easier to me than other such things that I have to really work at. But I was fortunate that a long time ago, the Autodesk CEO back in the 1990s, Carol Bartz, gave me this one piece of advice, which was, hey, stop thinking about a career ladder and what comes next. Just think about what is in front of you and do a really good job. Because if you ever want to get another challenge, you have to have done well at the one in front of you. And that kind of really stuck with me. So whatever situation I was put into, I was like, what do I need to do to get really good at this thing? And my career arc started with, I was an engineer, mechanical engineer by training. I learned CAD when I was in university. First thing I ever got hired for was technical support. So I used to take over 100 phone calls a day. So it was one level above the mailroom. I would say 100 calls a day in the 1980s, late 1980s, and where people would call about everything from software to hardware problems they were having. But what that taught me was empathy. So to get good at that job, what I needed to do was be very empathetic. People would call up very upset. They were really in
And needing an
trouble.
immediate solution to something.
Immediate
None of it, like, no
solution.
talk now, just give me a
Yeah,
solution.
exactly. Or frustrated about something that was not working. So I learned being empathetic towards that. So when I did that reasonably well, I got promoted and somebody said, well, you're good at this. Maybe you can run a team that does this. And so then the next thing I had to learn was how do you manage a bunch of people, which is not something I was used to. And there you then start learning how do you motivate people? How do you kind of coach people? How do you kind of address, the first time I ever had to let somebody go, really difficult moments, right? But you learn to kind of do that. And as I succeeded at that, you get kicked Peter principle, you get, okay, you're doing this, now you can run all of support. So now you start thinking about what is the result I have to drive for the company? What is the bigger issue? It's not just team management. So now it's the next challenge that you take on. And all of that led me to a place where I could now turn from managing support. And somebody gave me a break, I would say, to say, hey, why don't you take all that knowledge and start working on what we call product management, which is, figuring out what to build next. I would tell you that one of these moments in my career that I really had to think about was when they gave me that chance, it was a step down in terms of title and salary, not just a little, but it was a lot. I went from, I would say it was 2 steps below, not just 1 step below, which is a big moment for me to really think about, is this what I want to do? But I think I was at that time 7 years into the journey of support and stuff. And I just felt this passion of like, okay, I think I've reached my max limit of what I can do there. This is an opportunity for me to kind of maybe get to the front end of the process. Product management was interesting because that then I would say started giving me my little MBA kind of thing where you now have to think more broadly, not just in terms of functionality, but how do you start turning a product into a successful enterprise? Like you have to figure out how to make money. Of course, you got to make customers happy, which is the core of it. But now you need to think about how do you build around that. So that started becoming my education. And I would tell you, this is the big cliche in Silicon Valley is that you sometimes learn more from failure than you learn from success. I had one huge success, which was in '94 when we got put on from Autodesk. People who are familiar with the Autodesk history would remember a product called Release 14, which was a huge turnaround. And that whole project taught me the value of what you call prioritization. How do you make hard choices? Like that's really always, you only have so much. In my case, it wasn't money at that time, but only so many engineers to work with. How do you pick the things to work on? How do you prioritize? But after Release 14, I kind of left the company and went and did in the first .com Web 1.0 era. I was enamored with the idea of this huge disruption that was taking place with the internet and trying to start something with my couple of colleagues. And that was a great idea, wrong timing, and it failed. And those 2.5 years, I call it my $17 million MBA because I learned so much about, I would call it selling, which is like, it's not just now building a good product, but how do you get customers to part with money where the rubber meets the road because you're really trying and you're the salesperson, as a startup. And without that experience, I would have never become CEO of Autodesk because that really taught me that last part of thinking through how do you now create an effective go-to-market kind of experience. And that, in short, Tanya, was the story of how I kind of got to the Autodesk thing, where when I came back from that .com experience, they gave me a small business. It was 5 million. I was able to make it 50. Then they gave me a bigger one. Then they gave me a bigger one. And they gave me, okay, all of it. Like it was a series of steps that, but I mean, I know I'm fast forwarding it in the interest of time. Every time, the skills you need to go from 5 to 50 are different than the skills you need to go from 50 to 500. There's skills different to go from 500 to 5 billion. Like every time you have to learn how to scale the things that you're doing. And some things were easier than others. let me pause there and see what you want me to talk more
Oh,
about.
honestly, brilliant. I love that's your $17 million MBA indeed, like
Yes.
learning on the ground
Yes.
and seeing and having it like your skin in the game and having
Yes.
to learn the hard way. But then
Yeah.
to turn back and go back into something that you deliberately stepped out of. But
Yes.
now with this wisdom of,
Yeah.
oh, I can see how great ideas can just get lost and,
Yes.
driven over and squished and
Yeah.
squashed.
Yeah.
So now that you've got this wisdom, you bring that back into a very big company that presumably is quite set in its ways. And then you say, well, first challenge, then the next challenge. And you're not looking for end results initially. You're just tackling that next thing in front of you, back to
Yeah.
that first lesson
Yeah.
that you gave.
Yeah. So Tanya, I think I again was fortunate to work with someone way wiser than I was at that stage, and that was the next CEO that I worked with, was Carl Bass at Autodesk, and the thing I learned from him a lot was, in large companies, despite having whatever it is, 7,000, we had 7,000 people at the time, I think, and it grew to 10,000. It's like you can only kind of do two or three, like large companies are like battleships. And the challenge in, turning battleships, they turn slowly. And while, because of the sheer footprint of a company, you can have 100 things going on, literally 100, 200 things going on in the company. Everything from, listen, we need to raise debt financing for this, or we need to buy back shares, or you need to, go after this competitor. At the highest level, there are like two or three things that are disproportionately important, and kind of figuring out that's where you have the biggest leverage was super important. Like, in my brain, it became like, okay, 70 to 80% of my time should be spent on these two or three things, and the other 20% of the time is on all the remaining 97 things. And the combination of the startup experience and the large company experiences, in the startup universe, and even now, you basically only have one thing you're doing. The amazing thing about startups is that there is no need to sort of align anyone. You are all in just one direction. And there's also a desperation because there's really a time clock on your head, because you only have so much money in the bank, and every day it goes down. In a large company, you have the opposite. You have no urgency. Really, large companies have so much money that they are like, this can take 5 years, right? So, and they have 100 things going on. So you can really dissipate yourself. So I think the discipline I was able to bring there is, okay, we got these two things or three things to do. We only have this much time. And how do you drive that urgency through the company on these two or three things? In Autodesk's case, this was back in 2011. It was really moving from the desktop nature of the products to making them more cloud centric. That became the big switch that we tried to execute over 7 to 8 years. It was successful. They're still enjoying that whole thing. That was the number one thing. And driving that change to the organization was very easy to say, extremely hard to do, with so many things to
And
drive.
that's what I want to touch on, because I want to touch on the hard stuff, because I
Yeah,
think that's it. Like you can say that there's a battleship and there's
yeah,
hundreds of projects and there's
yeah,
7,000 people,
yeah,
but now you want to move them just pivot just a notch this way and we're going to
yeah,
go cloud based. But
yeah,
that is not the way it's been set up.
yeah,
So, there's a lot of cultural things that need to shift. There's a lot of
exactly,
systems that need to shift. And you
exactly.
can't just wave a magic wand, although there's the money there and potentially time. But
Yes,
the missing ingredient is the willingness to change
yeah,
what the day-to-day looks like.
yeah, yeah. So that project, like, I mean, those kinds of transformations at scale are really hard to pull off, and there were really two sides to that transformation that we pulled off over 7 to 8 years. One was the business model, and how we collected money, how the resellers made money, how we reported stuff to the street, which I, quite did give credit where credit is due. Andrew, who's the CEO now, really had a lot to do on that part. I definitely helped with it, but there was a lot of heavy lifting on that front. The lifting on my side was more on changing the way the products were built and the engineering behind them. and then finding new things to go do. And that was my second thing. So I'll come back to that in a second. So let's just describe. So we got this, I think in 2011, we had been operational for 25 years as a company. And no, since 1984, maybe even longer than that. So it's like almost 30 years as a company. And so it's a whole, as you said, infrastructure, a talent, people who are comfortable building software in C++ on the desktop. And now you kind of have this existential crisis that you need to go to the. So the easy thing to do, relatively speaking, is just make it a priority. So you're standing up and telling hundreds of people all the time is the number one thing to do.
Follow
But
me.
follow me. Words are cheap, right? In some ways. Yeah, I mean, it is hard to make it very crisp and understandable, but I think so. You start there. You start with like why and what and why, and you keep telling them. The how is where it starts getting interesting. And I think the thing that we realized was that we needed to show something that worked. And while we kept telling people, hey, cloud's the big thing, they're like, well, we're seeing it being used to buy books. We don't understand how we'd apply it to this thing. And I think somewhere I ran across a book or somebody talking about change management, and they had this idea of like you kind of have to drive it through small wins. Like big changes happen through small wins. And that made a lot of sense to me. So at that time, we we were successful with one internal project and one external project. The internal project ended up being a product that some people will remember called Sketchbook. And what so we had this team, you would generally find in this group of 3,000 people, like not everybody is the same. Like you'll get like 10% of your gang that is like, all right, let's do it. And 90% is like, show me. So you got to find that 10%. And these 10%, like this group was like maybe 6 people. They were in Toronto, Canada. And they were like, hey, I have this idea, like, hey, this mobile phone, let's sketch with the finger and kind of, do it there. And I would give the vice president who was in my team credit for, he let them go do it. They did it, and instantly when we put it out, there was a reaction from customers. We had a huge number of people starting to use it. So now you could connect the dots. You showed that there was something possible. B, it was a kind of a cool product you could build. And C, people loved it. So you had one proof point from inside the organization. And then we also bought a small group, like it was 20 people in Israel, who were trying to do kind of CAD on the web and very early technology and kind of rough. But when we brought them in, and again, we helped them fully productize that product. And when we put it out there, again, we saw a spike in usage from customers. They loved it. So now we had a second proof point. And once you had two, because it's like they say, one can feel like a sort of a coin, whatever you call it, a nice thing. Two is now a straight line. There's a pattern here. And if you get the third one, now, in
That makes
geometry,
it a rule, doesn't it? 3 makes a rule.
exactly. Exactly. So then we started pushing other teams to start to do this. And that's kind of how the ball got rolling. Is like people say, okay, this is possible. It's successful. People get to a good product. And then the harder part started coming through in terms of we did have to rotate the talent. So I do think that over time, we probably changed at least 40%. This is, again, it sounds like a number, but there's human beings involved. There was about 40% of the engineering team that changed over. We had people left, we had other people come. So we had to get new DNA into the company, some through hiring, some through acquisitions. We had to create then some kind of forcing functions, like we gave people deadlines, like you all have to, as simple as it sounds, we say, hey, everybody needs to use one login system. Everybody wanted to invent their own. So that's the next thing that you have to deal with this large organization. So yeah, and they'll all argue with you, but you have to kind of start driving this like discipline of like, okay, we do this and then we do this to start changing the infrastructure, the process. And that, I think it took us 5 good years to kind of start turning the ship. And then that led us to the second thing, which was our ability to go build entirely new businesses, not just change the existing ones.
Just incredible. And now if we can shift to taking all those lessons to a
Yeah.
startup, and there's a
Yes.
lot of hype around Motif and
Yes.
really exciting things that you are
Yeah.
doing. So what brought this about? Why did you decide to just not go and relax on a beach somewhere? No, you wanted to go into the startup world.
I give you a slightly long answer on that, Tanya. Part of what we're doing in Motif, actually, towards the end of my tenure in 2017 at Autodesk, we were doing that. We had started an internal project to do that. And then once I left it, whatever, they decided not to continue it or whatever, it kind of stopped. Personally, I went off to do I always like get attracted to ambitious, high impact projects. And so the
I
one
get the
that,
feel, I get the sense of that, yeah.
yeah. So the one that I got attracted to in 2018 was, was robotics, because what I would say is that the theory, what Brian and I, who worked with me on that project, got excited by was computer vision. So before machine learning became this big thing, in the 2018 timeframe, computer vision was like really getting good because of all of the investment being made for autonomous driving. And so we thought about like what problems could we go solve now that, as you would say, computers can see, not just count. And people are doing drones, people are doing cars, people are doing trucks. We thought, okay, let's go after assemblies. Like, can we give robots more intelligence and insight? And it was a good project. I think, again, we were a little too early at that time. Like, again, now there has been even better when you take computer vision and you marry it with the
With
physical AI,
AI. Yeah.
physical AI models that are emerging, you can get a lot done. We got quite far even without that. And that was kind of a huge amount of learning. But in 21, I decided to, take a break, and think about whether I want, like, maybe, go do something else. And for a while, I contemplated like doing nothing, like this is be on a
Tell
board,
me, for
like
5 minutes, right? It was for five
yeah,
minutes you thought, oh, I
it,
could.
it lasted probably 3 months, and then I kind of couldn't handle it. Like it started like I felt like I want to build something. And so back to the thing that you correctly identified, Tanya, is that, okay, so I want to build something. It needs to be a big swing. Like this is going to be whatever I choose to do, just given, I'm 850 years old now. It's like, okay, I've got one project left in me. Like it needs to be a big swing. I'm not just interested in an incremental kind of thing. And in that process, I was approached by two, now three public companies. I had opportunities to be their leader. The more I examined it, I did not get inspired. I was like, there is nothing big. There's no big swing here. This is all like, hey, run this company, meet a bunch of foreign, whatever. You meet the mayor tomorrow. You meet it's a bunch of like good stuff, but it was just not for me. And it was very, very important to me to do something in the building industry. And because the buildings I think there's an emotional connection for me with buildings. And I also think the societal impact, the environmental impact, the economic impact of the building industry is just large. And Brian, again, he also left Bright Machines maybe a few months after me, and he similarly was interested for sustainability reasons, climate change reasons, to get involved in this. We shortlisted 6 projects. We're like, all right, we brainstormed with a couple of colleagues on 6 projects, and started calling people we knew in the industry, like, hey, what do you think ambitious team should go work on? And this is the one that rose to the top. It wasn't the first one we went to. It wasn't, hey, we did this in 2017. It was just one of the 6 things. But people, and the thing that appealed to us very oddly was it was hard. What we've chosen to do at Motif is really hard, from both from the engineering perspective of trying to pull it off, and also trying to get customers to use it. The go-to-market side is really hard. But that's what attracted us. And I would say the answer to your question about like crossing the line It's all about impact. And I don't care whether the impact is in a public company, private company, it just has to be set up to make impact. I'm not in this for ego, personal glory, money. Not, I know it sounds kind of like flippant to say it. That's not what is driving me right now. I just care about making an impact. And this project ticked off those boxes, but it's highly risky, which is also kind of like, I'll just say one thing and I'll stop, is that you mentioned, my Martin Day talk. Martin talks about this, whether it's us or this entire endeavor, as trying to climb the north face of the Eiger, which is the Eiger Mountain. Or other people say, you're trying to climb up K2. Not K2 as a mountain is way more dangerous than Mount Everest. So we're like, yeah, somebody has to do it. Otherwise, this industry is not going to move forward. The
And
industry
that's it.
sucks.
Like, it kind of just feels like there's some unfinished business here
Yeah,
in terms of, obviously with Autodesk, you could achieve a lot because there was a
yeah,
lot behind that company, and
yeah,
that company has a big impact in the AEC industry.
yeah,
It has shaped and formed many things, but
yes,
it's one company and there's
yeah,
many more things to be
yeah,
done. But I guess
yes,
having seen what you have seen working in the Autodesk environment, like you said, there was maybe six things you could have grabbed hold of that
yeah,
that you could have run with. But I guess it's just yeah, it's kind of the BIM world, but this is reinventing BIM, and so therefore it's a challenge because of all the systems and all the things we've spoken about with a huge company, let alone an industry that is just struggling, struggling to innovate, struggling to move towards things that are change. Even though effectively, when you think about it, the AEC industry is all about change. We build change. That's
yes,
what we do, but we can't really seem to soak it in the way we work. It's just such
yeah,
a curious thing, isn't it?
yeah. It is. It's interesting. I mean, I'm a fanboy of the building industry. I have never built a building myself. My sense of it is there's this constant struggle between aspiration. Like, these things have such amazing form, and there's huge levels of engineering and inventive construction that need to be done to pull off many of these projects. And then there's risk, which is, you're creating a physical structure. Nobody wants to be responsible for something that went wrong, whether it's, a leaky roof, or heaven forbid, something that falls down. Like, that interplay is where this industry kind of gets stuck. Um, but, it's a very noble endeavor. And I'm always struck by the fact that many people want to do the right thing. So I think my sense of the industry is that it eventually gets there. It's just a lot slower. And I think anybody building tools for this industry just really has to be ready for you have to be patient is a real virtue in this industry. This doesn't move. Like, these days you're AI this, AI that. I mean, I live in my bubble in San Francisco where I literally every 15 minutes there is some, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing, and there's 100 people using it. That's just not the nature of the building industry. They just are very, very, while they are interested and have a broad range of, capabilities, they just adopt things more slowly. So,
And so you speak about building intelligence for the built world.
yeah.
So how is Motif, what you're doing in terms of building software? How is that different to what we have seen before?
Uh, I'll give you let's start with the, use the word intelligence. I mean, the core is, well, let's look back at, like, there's so many things that have happened technology wise, but if I limit myself to the design process, the first leap was from paper to digital, which made making changes a lot easier. The next leap was from going from 2D to 3D. And so then you had this thing with building information modeling where you had much more sense of coordination and accuracy, and all those things came. The one that is like was apparent to us is that the every project is a unicorn like, it's like everything starts from scratch, and there's so much knowledge in these companies, and you have to find a way to make that leveraging that knowledge is the next paradigm. So, you went from 2D to 3D. I'd literally say you have to go from dumb geometry to knowledge as the next jump. And so what we've been trying to build a platform about is, yes, we need to describe the building, but we also need to find a way to encode people's knowledge. And these days, the word that people are using and are more comfortable talking about is agents. Is the idea that you can build agents and make them work like humans. And effectively, that's the core idea of what we're trying to do with Motif, is that how do you create agents for designing buildings? Like, that's the idea. Now, will we give tools to people to design walls, doors, and windows? So yeah, the future is agents and humans collaborating. So humans think, the tools that a human will use will look like geometry, and the tools that agents will be like APIs, but you have to make them work in a way that is collaborative, and that's sort of our big insight to try and make it work.
And I guess, this is like riding a wave now, isn't it? And AI is moving so fast, but there's still a lot of trepidation in the industry. Will they take our jobs? Will, all of that. But how are you riding the wave, and how are you sort of calming the fear at the same time?
I don't think we can take too much credit for either of those. What look, this is what I would say is that both things are true. Like, every economic or technology disruption, in the short term, there is definitely challenges where this technology is going to look like it's going to replace humans. But in the long run, what it does is it augments people. And our focus, at least in the things that we've been building, is we're not trying to say, here's an architect in a box, or here. What we're trying to do is like ask the people we're working with is like, what's boring about your job that you wish somebody else did for you? And can we use AI to take care of that stuff that is not the most exciting, parts of things to do, and automate that. So building code compliance is a good example of that. Like, people,
So it's the boring things, but it's also where's the biggest risk that we can help reduce the risk, because this is a
exactly.
risk averse industry, and yet there is so much risk involved. Hence the innovation isn't fast enough. Hence there isn't change happening because of all the risk. So if you can start reducing risk and improving certainty and outcomes,
Yeah.
that has to be a win for
Yes.
everyone involved.
Exactly. So yeah, that's our path through this, is to find things that take care of things that are important to people right now, either because they're too boring or because they're too hard in some ways to do just naturally. And that's so, as we demonstrate the fact that AI is actually helping them do their jobs better, win business, make better proposals, that is our way through this. So.
And so if we look at some of the key kind of leadership lessons you learned from a big company to how you are now translating that to a startup. So yes, you wanted a big challenge. And so it looks like that has delivered so far. Okay. Excuse me. So how have you gone about taking some of those valuable lessons from a very large company and applying it to the small scale?
It's a great question. Let me think on that. Because I can certainly talk about it going the other way, where, lessons that I learned through my startup life, I can see how I could apply it to a big company. I think the things you learn at big companies, uh, I'd say strategy is one of them. Like, one of the things that happens with the difference between a startup and a large company is, large companies think a lot more about resource allocation. Like, every year you're like, where I talked about the priorities, and you're a lot more formed competition. You have, so you pay attention to those things. That's one area where you put. So I think having some discipline, and startups tend to be a little bit more Brownian motion. Like, the nature of startups is, hey, we'll try this, we'll try that, we'll try this. It's always experimentation. And so it lends itself to be compared more to like experiments in a lab until you find something that works, and then you scale it. So, and I think large companies are good about how do you scale something. So I'd say strategy is one. Second, the thing I learned at large companies is that the more you simplify, the faster you can go. And the idea is like, because large companies inherently create things that are complex, like you're always trying like that. So you always try and fight it, and you're always trying to say like, where are we doing two of the same thing that you should do one? Like I think that principle, I think of trying to do, because simplicity is speed. Simplicity lends itself to speed and scale. The simpler you make things, the faster you go, the more you can scale. So I try to like really bring a level of like, let's just be clear about what are we experimenting on, and then if the experiment works, like let's go with it and stop still experimenting. Like that sense is there. And I think the other thing about a large company that is useful in startups is things like, how do you make money? Like business models are important, and you give it a lot of thought around how do you ultimately create a economically viable company. Those things, that thinking, I think on the day-to-day job, I've learned a lot about working with smart people. I think, large companies, Autodesk was certainly true. Like I had a lot of smart people to work with, and how you manage, how you recruit, how you train, how you reward, all of those, that I think on a daily basis is probably the thing I lean on more. The other three things are a little bit longer arc.
And also what you were saying before about understanding that 80% of your time needs to be spent on certain things, and
Yeah.
20% is like all the other faff, but it has to be
Yeah.
done. It's business. It has to be
Yeah.
done. But in terms of that, okay, you've decided on this 80%. That 20%, is that really about surrounding yourself with people that can take some of that from you, so
Oh
that
yeah.
you literally could just focus on your core strengths, those things that are going to move the needle and only you can do?
Yeah. Anytime, this thing I've learned over the years is that you need to understand what you're personally good at, and then surround yourself with people that are compliment you on that. And everybody, you hear about Elon Musk, and he's amazing about being able to dive into like low level engineering stuff, but he may not be good at some other things. But so I don't know him. I can't comment on him. I've realized that for me, I need to complement myself with a couple of different types of people who can help me with the things I'm not good at. And so, yeah, I do that, and they help me with the other 80% of the stuff that I'm not great at, or I can be useful for maybe only a little part of it. Yeah. So, putting teams together. I mean, the best analogy I've ever had for business that is, there's only two. One which is not a great thing to talk about, which is war. Like, when you're running a business, it's a little bit like, hey, you're trying to conquer some kind of opportunity or territory. So leave that aside. The analogy that works really in my head on a daily basis is sports. So it's really a lot like, Alex Ferguson and Manchester United. Like that, I'll use that example. Like, look, you've got to think through who's the team. It's not just the 11 best people, but it's the 11 people that can work well together. There's no point having 7 star players on the field if they're not going to play well together. So it's get the right people, strategy, which is like, how are you going to beat the opposition? Like every opposition is different. You really have to think that through. And then he's always yelling from the sidelines. Like, you have to you have to watch the game and make game time adjustments. And that's kind of how I think about my job these days.
And in terms of, when you surround yourself with people that have different strengths to you, because that is the way to
Yeah.
bolster like the business,
Yeah.
it often leads to difficult conversations, because
Yes.
people who have different strengths probably have very different opinions about
Yes.
things.
Yes.
That, and you want to be challenged, but then again, nobody wants to be challenged. So it's kind of that balance of, I need people around me that will not just say yes to everything I say,
Oh
because
yeah.
that can't be good. But then
Yeah.
again, I also need a cheerleader, and I also need to, we need to get this done. So it's a tricky balance, isn't it?
There's definitely a tricky balance. I mean, um, I maybe share two things. I would say my co-founder here at Motif, Brian, and I are a good example of the first part of it. Like Brian always has told me the truth. He's always been very clear, and we kind of counterbalance each other, not just because he's technical and I'm not, or whatever. It's more that he's like pragmatic and I'm a little idealistic. So our push and pull tends to be like, if we see something, I'll be like, hey man, let's go for it. And he's like, no, slow down. Like, we're a little opposite.
Let's just press pause. Let's just, see what the
Exactly.
risks are first, shall we?
Exactly. Exactly. And so we always have, like, we do have sometimes very collegial arguments, and sometimes it gets more passionate. Uh, but we've learned to listen to each other over the years and be kind of like, we have a lot of trust that's built up. So sometimes really effective collaboration is about trust, because you want to be able to hear the person for what they're saying, not how they're saying it. So, because, you can get emotional and yell
Oh,
at
yeah.
each other, right? It's just like any good relationship. Like, you really have to say, like, what is he really trying to tell me? So I think a really great team is able to get to that core where everyone is kind of listening for content and not sort of affect around it. Like, that is really important. I do think ultimately, as everybody has a role, so it's my role ultimately to make the call, and I have to be comfortable with it, and everybody else has to have the agree and commit or disagree and commit gene. You can't not commit. If you don't want to commit, then you have to leave the organization. I think I've found that useful. So you have a debate moment, you have a decision moment, and then you really have to move forward. You can't endlessly debate. So you have to put a timeline on all of this stuff. Timelines in startups are 7 times smaller. I think every year in a startup is like a dog year. I say, it's like, so everything in a startup is 7 times faster, or you have less time than a larger company. In larger companies, maybe you can debate a little bit more. The nuances are a little bit more, but yeah, that's what we've learned.
But just on that, like the speed thing, I mean, I guess AI is now giving everyone access to speed of change, of knowledge, of systems, of new tools than ever before. So I guess this lowers the barrier now to people saying, I've got this idea. I can ideate it with AI. I don't need to surround myself with huge numbers of people right now, but I would presumably still need to have those people I can bounce ideas off, the ones that will hold me accountable, will tell me the truth, won't let me just go on and on about things. So it's an interesting era we're in now, isn't it?
Absolutely, Tanya. I think that what AI has the thing that it has really lowered, it's a little bit like the printing press and Gutenberg or whatever you'd call it, is that what is lowered is the cost of production. And what it has not changed is the idea. So the thing that you have to be now even more careful about is, what are you going to do? Sure, the ability for you to now run that experiment and see what people react to, or to do something and now scale it up, has changed dramatically. Our software development velocity is like, I don't even and it really happened this year, like late December to now. It's probably gone up like 5 to 10x. It's ridiculous how fast you can go, but you can go really fast in the wrong direction. So the thing that we are paying a little bit more attention to now is picking what we're going to do, and that's where we're sort of, some of the time that we've gained in the act of creating software has been applied to, like, hey, what are we really going to do here, guys?
Because we could be going really fast towards a solid wall.
Exactly.
But just on that, in terms of, I guess this is the startup thing that's easier, that you can pivot and you can change. And I know you speak a lot about, talking with customers and understanding what their pain points are and addressing that, and not skirting that, not bypassing that, because it's hard. That's hard to want to hear feedback that's honest about your products or your services or any of that. But I'd love you to talk about that, because I think certainly in the architecture world, we don't do enough of this, because well, a lot of our projects, we wait a long time until they deliver in order to get the positive feedback, or feedback generally. But there's like a 10-year period potentially where you're relying on some feedback from some small stakeholder conversations, but they're not the people that genuinely will use the building, etc. But I'd love to know, just from your, like, the product world, how is it that you get to grips with what your customers need and want, and not get distracted by that, or get distracted by it in a good way?
Yeah, I mean, listening is a skill, and it doesn't, not everybody does it really well. I think you have to, one, make sure, just like I told you about the team, where you kind of put a set of diverse pieces of input, like, you need to like have a good cross section of customers you're listening to, so where you can see a pattern emerge from what people are telling you, and not like, oh, this person asked for blue circles, so I have to go to blue circles now. It's like it really, and then good questions is a Socratic method of like, why are you, if somebody says, hey, this is not working for me, don't just say, oh yes, but like, why? And somebody says, well, it's not looking right. Like, what are you, like, there's a few follow-on questions. So listening is a skill, synthesizing is a skill where you're able to watch differing points of view and get it right. I would say, like, I do think, and we've gone through this quite honestly in both all three startups that I've done, is extremely humbling at times when people give you feedback, because a lot of it, especially when you come out with a 1.0 product, is very embarrassing, because they're mostly telling you it doesn't work, man, or it's terrible, or it crashed. It's just the nature when you're early that you have that, and you can get very defensive or dejected. I think you just like one of the things about receiving feedback also is about being resilient. Like and which is hard, because a lot of people say, as one of my colleagues says, is that it's like hearing that your baby's ugly. Like, it literally is like you've got all this like passion, you put it out there, and first thing they say is like, what the hell is this? It's not useful. It's really like, and you're defensive. It's like, hey, it's my baby. How can you say bad things about it? Like, it's a very sort of, and I think we are all human. You have that emotion, but you have to kind of step back and begin with the end in mind and say, okay, feedback is a gift. As long as we know what to do, we can do something about it, and just take it as a step along the way. And I think I think actually the thing I've learned is putting things out in front of people and being vulnerable in that sense of getting rough feedback is actually the best thing you can do. It really helps you get to a better place faster than if you wait till things are perfect and then discover, your thinking was wrong all the way. So I am much more, I think I've learned over the years to say that, especially startups are much more like calculus than Newtonian mechanics. Like, it's a bunch of fast iterations, and the faster you get feedback, the better you can iterate to the right answer. So.
But it is quite unusual for a CEO to be so adamant about this and to do this yourself. Like,
Yeah.
because I can imagine, certainly with the big companies, you need to, well, obviously you're expecting your senior leaders
Oh, yeah.
and multiple levels to be doing this. But how important do you think is it that the top level CEOs who've got a million other things to do actually hear firsthand the feedback?
It's like, I feel, even when I was at Autodesk, I think that spending time with customers was probably my favorite thing to do, or second favorite thing to do. Maybe it's very hard, because look, I think you have to ground everything in reality. Like, if you don't get the real, you always you hear this certainly about battles and things like that, but even in business, like you hear like, so what's happening on the front lines, by the time it makes it to the CEO, there's at least somewhere between 3 and 7 levels of indirection. And every person is filtering the news going up the chain for some reason. So by the time it comes to you, it's like you don't know what is
Only
really
get good
going.
news. Only good news.
You only get good news, or even if you get bad news, you get sort of a very watered down version of the bad news. You never smell the actual sort of, and so being able to do, I think, is hugely important. You need to be able to ground yourself in reality. Now, I think you have 100 things to do, so you can't just be doing only this all the time. But I would say, as a public company CEO, you should be spending at least a third of your time getting unvarnished feedback from your clients. And in the startup, I think it's almost more than half my time. But one other thing that I've had to do in startups is actually sell myself, like ask customers. Because, when we started, the first time we got the product out, we had no sales team. So who was going to ask the customer and say, hey, would you mind paying for this? I had to do it. And that was deeply uncomfortable. But it was also, there was something that I learned from that experience where they would tell me, give me their whatever. I learned about their budgeting. I learned about what was important to them. Like, and I think the thing I've always enjoyed about speaking with customers is I learn from them. So if you approach every conversation as a learning conversation and not like I am the CEO kind of person, like that works for me.
But just touching on that, sales is hard. Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally agree. And certainly if you've come from a design background or you've come
Yeah.
from just actually working inside of a company to
Yeah.
then suddenly be the front face of a company and have to
Yeah.
sell is just a completely different story. But why do you think it's so hard, especially when you have the vision and you know all the details and you know why this product exists or this project exists, and yet you still find it difficult to sell?
It's some of it may just be like whatever you're used to and cultural and things like that. I think what I had to learn, like I used to be embarrassed by the act of asking for money. It was just literally like there's something not nice about like, hey, can you give me some money? Like that was the what I've learned over the years is that if you really believe you're solving somebody's problem, like if you're like, they have a headache and you're giving them Tylenol, like there is a real exchange. If you have confidence in that, like that's the place to go. Because if you're solving, like the idea of a business or a product is that you are solving somebody's pain and you're charging a fraction of what it would have cost them otherwise. So if you're really confident about that, then I think saying, hey man, you know that if you use this tool, it's going to save you or help you win business, whatever the real value proposition is. The more confident you are, the easier it becomes to do that. If you're not confident about that, then yes, it's embarrassing to ask for money. Then you're like, hey, can you do me a solid? I need money. Then it's kind of weird. So,
I've also heard you speak. I mean, you've spoken already to me now about how important the team is, and but that idea that, culture eats strategy for breakfast or,
yeah,
along those lines.
absolutely.
And, I think that certainly at a startup, you've obviously seen what can happen with a big company when you arrive at a big company, but now you have the chance to build it from
Scratch.
the get-go. I'd love to know what sort of approach you're taking to building culture in
Mm-hmm. I
early.
think to build culture, I think you have two levers. One is who's in the company. Like really, the single way, most important way you build culture is that you get the right people in the company, and you edit, and the wrong people you ask them to leave, and it's the single biggest way in which culture gets formed. And second thing is I think, recognize that you help amplify the things that are important. So if there isn't a single company that I've ever heard that says customers don't matter. But when you watch how they actually behave, like you're like, dude, you're not really talking about customers matter. You're rewarding the wrong people. Like, here you come, you raised your prices 200%. How do you say customers matter? Like it doesn't. Like, you're going after people and saying, hey, you're going to pay for you're not rewarding people who are empathetic to customers, who are taking care of people. Like your actions matter. So I think in some ways that the mistake people make with culture is that they use the words, they don't back it with actions. So I think that combination is really important. I also have learned about culture is that you don't make it about 7 things, you make it about 3. And of
Mm.
3, maybe 1 is the most important. So like, I look at some companies. Netflix is one I admire. Amazon, not I don't admire it, but there's one aspect you've learned it. Like Amazon their culture is about operational excellence. Like they really care about removing every single piece of friction and cost out of the system. They get those people in there, they reward that behavior. It's very clear about that, right? Uh, Netflix is a little bit more about, sort of a very engineering culture, like really building a really difficult product really well. And they do that extremely well. They have this idea where they're like every year they basically re-interview somebody for their job, like because they believe that the thing is. And for me, the thing that there's the 3 things. The one that's most important is customer focus for us, that we really need to anchor ourselves in the reality. The other 2 that we really care about are what I would say doing the right thing. Like it's like being ethical and considerate. and then doing it the right way, which means you're paying attention to quality in everything that you do. But
But
yeah,
now when
that
you
is,
add AI to that, it is this again fine line with, obviously it's a great thing to be coming in with strong ethics and governance around the right thing. But when AI takes on like its own generative thinking, so it's not just answering, it's not just
yeah,
responding and reacting, it's now generating.
yeah,
It's another layer, isn't it, to then
it is.
still make sure that the ethics,
Yeah,
the
exactly.
governance.
Exactly. And then, you're watching this play out in the broader world with Anthropic versus OpenAI. Like, you can literally see the Anthropic chose a little bit more on the ethical side, and they made investments, they walked away from the Pentagon, like their actions are backing. They're not just saying that. Well, OpenAI or Grok has been a little bit looser on that front, right? It's a choice. And so I think you can do AI and also hold on to your ethics. Like that is the path we want to be on.
So if we just put it back onto you personally in terms
Yeah.
of what you want to see change in the AEC industry, and why is that important to you to change it?
I would we've been using the word sometimes in conversations of joy. So it's been like when people use tools in many industries, you see their eyes light up. I've seen people who, when they use Figma in creative world, or they, today we use Cursor or Claude Code, like we're like, Jesus, this is amazing. I'd honestly tell you, it's probably been 25 years since I saw somebody use an AC tool and their eyes light up. Most of it is like, oh my God, I've heard the word torture. I've heard the word, there's just like, oh, you know what? We got to do this. It's just kind of like, it's not a joyful experience, but it gets my work done. There's this sort of like resignation to this is what I have to use. So for me, I think the thing I would love to feel like we made a difference in is to bring joy back to people's profession. Like, this is so much better, so much nicer. So this is like fun to work on. Like, that's, I think, a personal mission of mine. What was the second part of your question?
Well, I guess it's just, and how will that, why is that important to you, and what change will it make for the industry, really?
Yeah. So joy is the change I want to bring to the industry, help people design better buildings. Why it's important to me personally is like, this one, I think I was fortunate to be at Autodesk for a long time. I feel like the industry did a lot for us. Like, I learned a lot, got to see some amazing projects, met some amazing people. I just want to give back. In some ways, I know this is I'm not running a charity, but the effort of this the company is to basically honor the people that build the buildings, and so for me, it's like this emotional thing. Like, these guys work on hospitals, they work on airports, all these things make a huge difference in our lives, and I'd like to make a difference in theirs.
And in terms of, so working with architects and engineers who are building the buildings, but equally the clients who are commissioning them, where do you sit in terms of your customers coming
Yeah.
in from the two different sides?
Yeah, we know the people on the architect and engineering side a lot better than we know on the people on the client side. We love to get to know the people on the client side, but historically, the people I've gotten to know are on the architect and engineering side. Obviously, the people who are, it's always like Florence. Like, you go back to the Renaissance, that Florence wouldn't have happened without the Medici's, right? They did make the Michelangelos, and we all, are inspired with the Michelangelos and Vasari's of the world. But the clients play that role. Like, every time somebody steps forward and says, hey, listen, I'll fund this amazing museum or cultural center, they're, making a positive contribution to the world. So I do admire them. I just don't know them very well. So I'd
So
love to.
what's next for you in terms of that next thing that's in front of you, in terms of, it's no ladder, but it's what's in front of you right now as your next challenge?
Look, honestly, Tanya, it is to finish what we started. So, like, we have a lot of hard work to do to take all this vision that it's words are cheap. You have to deliver. So we need to deliver this amazing product, which is intelligent and capable, and all of the things that we've promised, and bring that to life. Like, that is still many, many months of work. And so I would just say that's all I'm consumed by. I've stepped out of every single board, every other thing that I've been involved in previously, just to focus on this. So that's really front and center. We have a bunch of milestones. We have something really, a couple of really important things that are coming out this year. And that's what my near-term focus is on. So I don't have once we get through that, then I'll think about what to do next, so, but we want to make a huge impact with what we're trying to deliver this year. So.
And clearly I can see in Forbes have got their eyes on you in terms of as a company, maybe also on you personally, but as a company in terms of your company to watch. And I'd love to know just kind of the horizon scanning that you're doing in terms of where you see the industry going and what other things should and are in development that kind of work in and alongside what Motif is doing, because clearly we're in an ecosystem here.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of I definitely think AI is the next big wave. Like cloud was the last wave that, in cloud brought collaboration or teamwork. It brought lots of goodness. And I think, AI is now all about addressing all the things that we were talking about, accelerating automation, bringing more intelligence to the process. And I would say, on a regular basis in this industry, I meet a bunch of people that are doing good, interesting projects that are with AI in the center. I talked about building code compliance. That's one example. There's lots of things that are happening. What I've really appreciated now in the last 2 years is there's many more companies that have started up that are relatively small now, but I think have a lot of promise to go after things like sustainability, like carbon calculations at scale, or energy analysis, acoustic analysis, all these things that were kind of hard or very specialized domains, very nerdy things. Like one dude in some corner knew about it. Like being able to scale that stuff is exciting to start, to bring that to scale in the design of buildings. Yeah.
And are you seeing different patterns emerging? You're currently in the US, but clearly you've got bases in the UK and elsewhere. So are you seeing a difference in sort of uptake of this change, of this AI use, of the need and willingness to adopt new software?
I mean, there are two patterns. One, definitely the United States is leaning in a lot harder into AI adoption. There's a lot more experimentation that's happening geographically over here that's opposed to European Union. No judgment on my part, but I think people in the European Union and UK tend to be a little bit more worried about privacy and things like that. The United States I think people are really leaning into it. I think the other thing is a difference by profession. So what we're watching is certainly anybody developing software, legal, healthcare. There are professions where AI is really taking off. There's a set of underlying reasons or patterns why that might be happening in those industries. So that's the other pattern. It's like we are watching certain industries adopt AI much more aggressively than others.
And I'm guessing architects are some of the slowest, right?
No. Yeah, they're definitely. Architecture is more conservative, and as I'm learning, there's certain parts of architecture that are more open, or certain tasks in architecture that people are more willing to do. But yeah, it's further down the chain in terms of adoption. So.
I'd love for you just to, as we sort of close out, given that this is about courageous leadership, and how next gen leaders and even established leaders can just find more courage to do big, bold things, and whether that's to build businesses or whether that's just to get these complex projects across the line more successfully than has been done before. What advice would you be giving?
Personally, I used to say this to my kids, like, I used to hear that, you become the average of the 5 people closest to you, right? In some ways you kind of, or average, or you get influenced by. So choose your friends really carefully. If you're after this task, who do you talk to on a regular basis will really influence your ability to be courageous. So if you surround yourself with 4 or 5, if you're an entrepreneur, I'd strongly urge you to find 2 or 3 people who have done this before. that'll help you be courageous. Because it does get lonely, and you're going to get at least once, maybe 10 times along the way, get real doubt about pulling this off. And it's those moments where you need somebody who you can talk to, will give you some sense of perspective. And so I think curating the people that can sort of guide you on this journey is really important. If you end up with people who are risk averse, you're going to lose courage very fast. If you're going to end up with people who are like crazy people, they'll make you take too much risk. So think about who you have, who you want to learn from. That makes a big difference. And I think I always find that, whenever I go through my moments of doubt, if I can call on a couple of people, they give me really good perspective. And that really helps staying on the path.
I mean, obviously, if you can build those people into your world in terms of co-partners and collaborators and investors and all of that, even better. But they don't have to be so integrated into your business or into your daily life, do they? You can call upon, you can kind of reach out to them and draw them close when needed. Obviously, you've got to spend time building a relationship for that to happen, but that sounds like it's really good investment of your time to start curating that. And I guess that also can evolve over time as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I always find that there's plenty of opinions, but wisdom is always in short supply. So, try and find wisdom.
I love that. Oh, that's a beautiful way to close. Thank you so much for your time today. Honestly, there's so many nuggets in there, and I knew that you would deliver, because when I heard you speak at Next Build, Next Development, I wrote down so many notes, and it has stayed with me, and I was so looking forward to this conversation, and you totally delivered. So thank you so much for your time.